Welcome to Pages from the Dark Side, the monthly book club podcast with a specialization in spooky. I am your host, Dylan Ludwig, and with me, as always, is my lovely wife and co-host,
Alyssa Ludwig, also known as the Earbud Bookworm. And today we are talking about Final Girls by Riley Sager and the Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix.
As always, spoiler content warning ahead.
And I would say fair game. We're going to have spoilers for lots of different movies and stuff. I don't know if we're going to be able to tag every single thing.
Yeah. So, firstly, I want to give a little bit of house cleaning on this. We actually tried to record this as our first episode a year ago.
I think it was possibly over a year ago.
Was it? We were only going to do Final Girl Support Group, but we actually recorded the full episode, had a different camera setup than this, different mic setup, because we tried to do two mics here.
And that was our downfall.
And that
ultimately.
Because we had not had a lot of practice in editing multi-audio input.
Well, especially because we're both very loud people, so even though we were far apart with our mics, we kept picking each other up, so there was a echo. It was bad. It was bad.
If we had more professionally configured mics, I think it'd be different. But we're doing this with our very modest setup, so
very limited budget.
But now we've come back around and
come full circle.
Finally talking about this. But the catch with it is that in that meantime, you recommended to me Riley Sager's book.
Yes.
And I read it, and so at that point, I just said, if we're going to do this, we need to do them together. Because they're kind of the same book, but they're talking about different things.
Yes.
The other thing that's going to be interesting about this episode is that in the past, we have largely agreed on everything between these two books. But this time, we have a split of difference here. And this is going to make for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think so.
So, where do you want to start on this one? Well, I know where I want to start. So, both of these books deal with slashers and slasher conventions.
Yes.
Much like, it's funny that we're doing this soon after, well, not soon after, we're late on this, but after doing the Clown and Cornfield books, which are also slasher books that kind of deconstruct that genre a little bit. But I never asked, what was your entryway into slasher movies? If you had to think back.
Like the first one I ever saw?
Yeah, and then just kind of, did you get into it immediately, or did it kind of take some time?
Honestly, I think the first slasher movie I ever saw was Freddy's Dead.
Your favorite nightmare movie?
I watched it at a party when I was 14 or 15.
Yeah.
I didn't get super into slashers at that point. It was just oh, that's a fun movie and it's got Alice Cooper in it.
Yeah.
And I was a huge Alice Cooper fan. Got some mixed feelings about him now, but I still love his music, so
yeah.
We won't talk about that right now. But yeah, that was the first time that I ever saw a slasher movie. And I think the mic is picking up you cracking your knuckles. So,
oh, yeah, nervous reaction.
But yeah, I don't think I saw another slasher movie till I was an adult and married to my first husband. Unless you count Saw. Does Saw count? Or is that more just
it gets counted in the
gore
slasher pantheon, although, you could make the argument that John Kramer doesn't kill anybody.
Right.
But he kind of does.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
That's a weird ethical dilemma, but yeah.
If we ever want to have an offshoot where we talk about movies. Yeah. But yeah, so.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, this is interesting for me because slasher genre was actually my gateway into horror.
Okay.
I was familiar with it because I'm a 90s baby, and so the earliest that I was seeing of stuff was I would go over to a babysitter's house, and it was one of those babysitters that let their kids watch anything, no matter how, what the content was.
No matter how grown up.
Yeah, no matter how grown up. So I had been familiar with stuff like Halloween, and I'd even seen Nightmare on Elm Street snippets on TV, which at that time scared the shit out of me.
Of course.
Scream was probably the first big one that I kept seeing become super popular, and for good reason. It's had a resurgence of popularity now, although Scream 7. But really, the beginning of it for me was I watched Freddy vs. Jason when it first came to home video.
Which you're wearing your Freddy versus Jason shirt right now.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I know it's a punching bag movie in some circles, but it was the first love of horror for me.
Mm-hmm.
And like I watched it, wasn't scared of it, which I guess at that point I'm like, oh, I've grown out of being a scaredy cat with a lot of these things. But going forward, like watching that, I went down the rabbit hole of just all the Friday the 13th movies, all the Nightmare movies, all the Halloweens, and at that time all the Leprechaun movies, which I know you're personally not a super big fan of.
No. Oh, you dropped him.
Oh, well.
You dropped him.
I dropped him. But I had my Funko Pop ready for that because I got all the heavy hitters here, but I guess it wasn't meant to be. So,
it wasn't. So,
anyway, which book should we start with here? Because they're two very different things.
They are. There's definitely some similarities and some overlap just because of the genre.
Yeah.
But they are definitely handled very differently. One thing that I find interesting is that in both of them, the idea of the final girl is very much a real world thing.
Mm-hmm.
And even like in the final girl support group, those final girls have movies, but they're based on these girls' real lives.
Yeah.
It's not like a totally separate like fictional genre.
It's like in this world it's true crime.
Basically, yeah. And then in Final Girls there's just a handful, like there's 3 of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I found that interesting that's like a parallel between the 2 of them.
Well, it's also they're geared towards completely different audiences as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Final Girl Support Group is very much because Grady Hendrix does this. He very much takes a subgenre and then does a different spin on it, whether it's doing it with vampires or with ghost stories. I mean, not his first book, but like the book that made him super popular is this book called Horror Store.
I don't know if I've even heard of that one.
It's about a haunted IKEA.
Oh my gosh.
You might like it.
That sounds fun. That actually reminds me of a book that I read a long time ago. I want to read it again and see if I still like it. Anyway.
But Final Girl Support Group is definitely coming at the angle of we are gearing this towards horror fans.
Yes.
There are deep cut references in this book.
I'm sure there's stuff that I didn't catch.
It's funny that we're just now coming off of reading Stephen Graham Jones's Indian Lake trilogy, and those books have super deep cuts
I think
well. So
more so.
It's almost like the 2 fight each other for like who cuts deeper.
And Stephen Graham Jones would win. Sorry.
Yeah.
100%.
We will talk about that more next month.
Yes. Well, not the Indian Lake trilogy, but Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah. We got to meet him. But Sager is, I would say, the more populist writer. He's the one that I see books more often of at Target.
Right.
Because I would equate him, I don't know if I'd put him on the level of airport novel fiction, but it's definitely
kind of in that same vein, yeah. He definitely writes for the, like, book club crowd, I guess would be the way to put it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the plots of these books.
Okay.
Which one should we start with? Should we start with the Sager or should we start with the Hendrix?
Good question. Well, we could go in the order that they were initially written or the order that they were published, or we could just go with the order that they're sitting on our shelf.
All right. Well, let's go with shelf sitting.
All right. So Final Girls by Riley Sager first.
Yeah. Why don't you break down the plot of that?
Oh, gosh. I am horrible at this side of things, especially when I do not have a plot synopsis in front of me from like Goodreads or Wikipedia or something. But basically we're following a girl, well, she's a woman at this point, who was part of a campsite murder, like,
a massacre.
Yes, a summer camp thing. And she was the sole survivor. And, the cop came in and saved her. It's that whole trope of like, the big manly cop that, checks on her all the time and all that. And she, when this first happened, kind of got taken under the wing or the other woman tried to take her under her wing of a previous final girl. And the book kind of opens, the book opens with a flashback of the initial event, but it opens in quote unquote present day with, the death of her kind of mentor. who she ended up not actually having a close relationship with just because of things that come up in the book. And then shortly after that, the third final girl shows up, and they start to form a bond, and they're kind of bonding over trauma and the way that they've handled their trauma and all of these things. But the third final girl, was her name Lisa? She is not apparently who she seems to be. And
well, no, Lisa's the
first Lisa's one. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So who was the
Sam?
I kept getting them switched.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so Sam.
And Quincy is the main girl.
Yeah, Quincy's the main girl.
Which is funny because we just talked about Clown Cornfield, and the final girl there is Quinn.
Quinn, I know, Quinn and Quincy. Yeah, so one thing that I actually just recently read a review of a Riley Sager novel. I think he's got 6 novels so far, and I think I read half of them. I've read like his first 3. And this was his very first novel as Riley Sager. That's a pen name, and he's written some novels under his legal name, and I can't remember what that is right off the bat. But anyway, so this was the first one of his that I read, and it's the first one that he published under this name. And I liked it, and I've liked all of his books so far, but one thing that I hadn't really connected the dots with is that he really relies on the unreliable narrator because the woman is on drugs, or she drinks heavily, or this, that, or the other. And that is definitely a trope, and now it's going to bother me every time I read one of his books where I'm just like, use something else.
Well, because in this case, it's like selective amnesia.
Well, she's taking Xanax.
Yeah.
And she drinks.
Yeah.
I don't think she was drinking previously, but once Sam shows up, they start drinking together.
Yeah.
Because
and before she was kind of like wine momish, but not, even though she's not a mom, but
yeah. Well, was she? I can't remember if she was a drinker before, but I don't think that they made it a plot point that she was like drinking to the point of excess.
Yeah, I mean, she deals with her trauma initially by having basically a baking. Doesn't she have like a vlog about it too?
Yeah, well, it's a blog, I think.
Yeah,
just like print.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me a bit of like Anna Kendrick's character in the movie A Simple Favor, where she's got her own like baking vlog, and all of a sudden that turns into its own thing. But it like that's both of these books really are about how people process trauma, and they're both different extremes on it. And this is the extreme of denial.
Yeah.
Of going like,
oh, absolutely.
I went through this. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm moving on with my life. I don't want to be defined by this label of final girl. I didn't choose it. It was thrust upon me.
Which we kind of find out later, though, was her mom's doing. Yeah. Like, her mom wanted her to just bury it and pretend like it never happened.
Yeah. Which is, great parenting. The other thing is that with this third final girl that comes in and basically just intrudes on her life. Because she's got, on the outside, she's got pretty good life going on. She's got
she's got her blog that's making her money.
She has a wealthy lawyer fiance who they keep trying to throw this red herring at you that he's complicit in whatever conspiracy's going on. Turns out to be not the case. He's actually just a really good guy.
Yeah.
You also got this cop, the cop that saved her, who's just repeatedly checking in on her.
Right, and just comes whenever she calls, and
with a bunch of romantic tension here and there. And then the thing with the third final girl, Sam, as you said, you find out she's not who she says she is.
Like she gets arrested, and she's got a totally different name, and she's like, oh, well, I changed it because this was going on and that was going on, and this is where we're going to get into really spoiler territory. It turns out she is not the third final girl.
Yeah.
And in the grand scheme of like everything that's going on, she is in fact somebody who was involved with the man who got shot. Well, was he a man or was he a boy?
It was a teenager. Man. They both met each other in a mental institution, which I would assume was for either I think they were tried for adults.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
But he was the one that got shot because he was supposedly the one that had committed all these killings on that one night.
Yeah.
And she was convinced that he hadn't actually done it, and so she was trying to befriend Quincy to find out if she actually remembered more than she let on.
Yeah.
So that she could finally put to rest the idea that her I guess boyfriend had done this.
Yeah, but to do that, she does this long con,
with very long
with
con,
a ridiculous amount of subterfuge and a bunch of just lies upon lies and manipulating people in her life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. Like this is, I'll just say right off the bat, of the two books, this is the one that I favored lesser. I think this is,
which I totally understand. It's definitely not going to be for everybody, and I actually think when I went back and reread it, I don't think I liked it as much as I did the first time.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where I don't know if it's just because I read so many books and I also have ADHD and a bad memory.
Yeah.
But I did not remember the ending when I reread it, and it had only been like a year since I read it the first time.
Which, this might be a good time to switch gears because both these books actually do have the same problem for me, and it deals with their climaxes.
Okay.
And because they're almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
So to switch gears over to Final Girl Support Group, Final Girl Support Group is about the final. We're from the point of view of the final girl of Lynette Tarkington. I think is her name.
Yeah.
And she is on the opposite end of the spectrum. She's not quite Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween 2018. She's
close.
She's very much like, Sidney Prescott in later Scream movies where she's, constantly on alert.
Right.
Has bug out bags, has an entire setup and plan. She has access to a gun at the very least.
She's got a security system, for her house. She even protects her little house plant named Fine.
Yeah, which is probably the best character in that whole book.
Oh my god, I loved Fine.
Yeah. He doesn't do anything, but he doesn't have to. He's just fine. And and every, it's like once a month or something like that, or she meets up with the titular support group, which has several other characters who are all basically all the protagonist characters are representations of other cinematic Final Girls.
Right. They're all based off of Final Girls from movies.
They're even somewhat named after them. Because I clocked that with Lynette when they went back in her backstory, which her backstory ties directly into Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Which I've never seen.
Yeah, which is funny because in the book they make it clear that she's not a final girl by definition because she didn't actually fight back.
Right. She played dead.
She played dead. She let the cops do everything. But her near death in the flashback she's named Lynette, but so her near death in the flashback, it's very much a play on Linnea Quigley's death in Silent Night, Deadly Night, where she gets hung up on the antlers and gets impaled on that. In that movie, she dies. In this book, she does not die, but it's not much better because she witnesses her entire family get murdered.
Right.
You got Marilyn, who is the Texas Chainsaw analogy. Named after Marilyn Burns.
Right.
She's become a rich debutante and just kind of dealing with her trauma just by kind of capitalizing on it. You have Heather, who, if you probably guess after Heather Langenkamp from Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right.
She's become just an alcoholic and a drug addict and just kind of burying her sorrows in that. You have... Now, this one is kind of interesting because Danny is clearly meant to be Jamie Lee Curtis from Halloween, but the name scheme is more off of Danielle Harris, who played Jamie, who's her niece in Halloween's 4 and 5.
Okay.
And then she was also in the Rob Zombie Halloween movies as Laurie Strode's best friend in both of those.
Okay.
And then you have Julia Campbell, who is the Sidney Prescott from Scream, named after Neve Campbell.
Right.
I feel like I'm blanking on one.
Yeah, there's the one that's based off of Leprechaun.
No. Based off of Adrienne King from Friday the 13th. She's the one that actually became a entrepreneur and and create outreach programs for other people with trauma.
Right.
Because the thing that kicks off the entire story is that she's killed.
Right.
Off screen or off screen, off page, I guess.
Right.
And then we come to find out that there is actually somebody that's going after all of them. And it's funny because both of these books kind of deal with people who have survived typical slasher, kind of, we watch those movies and they're horrifying, but we kind of keep them at an arm's length because we go, okay, but, a mass killer, that doesn't, wielding knives and bladed weapons, how often does that happen? But these deal with, like, the people, what they're dealing with in modern time is that people are, like, shooting at them.
Right.
And what's the thing that we're scared of now? It's not guys in masks anymore. It's mass shootings.
Right.
It's, people going into elementary school and gunning down a bunch of kids or gunning down a Vegas strip.
Right.
And Final Girls doesn't really go into all of that, although the reveal of the villain kind of has a bit of an element to it.
Yeah, a little
but
bit.
This one actually, because they keep doing this whole entire mystery of who's going after them. And there's another final girl that's in the mix who's kind of like the new blood of it all that Lynette feels like she needs to protect.
Right. Because she was at the there's a car driving past.
Yeah.
But because she was at the support camp, or I don't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah, it was Adrian's support camp.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the audiobook of Final Girl Support Group is done by Adrian King.
Yes.
I didn't listen to it. You did.
I did.
How is that?
It was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a really good narrator.
Yeah. Very nice lady from what I understand. Had a terrible stalking incident soon after that first Friday the 13th movie came out.
Well, damn.
Which is unfortunate.
That is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Life imitates art or something.
It kind of, yeah. So, again, Final Girl Support Group does deeper dives into horror movie conventions and tropes.
Yeah, and also like the lore that already exists, kind of.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Final Girls by Riley Sager, it's more. It has a lot of the tropes. It has a lot of the. I don't know. It's just like it's generic, I guess is what I would say. Like it's just
it's mainstream fiction.
Well no. What I'm saying is it's just another slasher.
Yeah.
Whereas Final Girl Support Group is like, hey, here's this nod to this movie you've already seen.
Well, I wish I could even go with you on it's just another slasher because for so much of Final Girls there is no slasher except for in the flashbacks.
Well, yeah, I mean
it's all psychological thriller stuff.
Yes, but my point is it's not giving nods to actual stuff that's already out there.
Yeah.
It's not giving nods to IP.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where our differences come in here because I lean towards the one that is going to be written for me, and it's going to be, it's going to trust that I know the genre well enough.
Well, and that's actually interesting that we do have this conflicting thing, and that's one of your key points, because so often I'm the one that's like, I love the meta stuff, I love the, the nods and the wink winks, and for some reason though, that one between these two, that one just didn't quite hit as much. Maybe it's because I don't have as much of a history with the genre.
Well, and the other thing is, I know that you are also very partial to the suburban thriller.
I am. I do
subgenre.
I do like that subgenre.
And this
like
Final Girls falls under that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that actually is a good point because as much as I love horror stuff. I love it. And I didn't always. But I do love that genre for movies, books, TV, whatever. I think mysteries and thrillers are always going to be my favorite, my bread and butter, you know?
And I think that's the reason why it's hard for me to classify Final Girls as a horror novel because the flashbacks aside, so much of it isn't. It's just kind of two people fucking with each other for a good amount of the book and kind of character motivations that shifting on a dime until you really realize everything that's going on.
Right.
Which even for me, and this is where we start to get into the heavy spoilers, because I'm just gonna talk about the climax of both these books.
Please do.
Both of these books have the issue of I predicted who was behind what at pretty quickly.
Not really.
No?
No, you didn't figure out Final Girl Support Group until like halfway through.
I figured out half of it.
Oh, okay.
Because Final Girl Support Group has two people behind it.
Yes.
Because they I wouldn't say they sabotaged it early on, but they kind of, opened the door for it early on. Because the final girl in question that is trying to be protected turns out to be in on trying to kill all the living final girls, because so one of the things that the physical version of this book does, I don't know if the audiobook version does as well, but they have these documents that break up the chapters, and the first one before the first chapter is a Reddit thread, and in it there is a username with that something Fugit.
Well, it's first off, in the audiobook it's Gotti, Gate is pronounced Gotti.
Okay. Fugat.
And the
Fugatti.
the user handle is Fubar Gotti.
Fubar Gotti, yeah. And the final girl in question is named Stephanie Fugatti.
Right. But you didn't pick up on that the first time you read it.
I feel like we talked about it pretty early on.
But you didn't pick up on it right away. I might still have the footage from the last time we talked about this book where you admitted you did not realize it until partway, quite a ways through. Now, whereas I figured it out the second I heard her name.
Yeah. Now, the other element of that is that the other killer involved in that turns out to be the son of the psychiatrist that is treating the final girls in question.
Yeah, that runs the support group. And for a fair amount of the book, they have a red herring that it's her.
Yeah.
And then, they kind of realize all these things about oh, well, he had access to all these things because he was doing all of her IT work and stuff like that. And
yeah. And I think it turns out to be her teenage son, which it's a predictable thing for it to, you think it, to them to lean towards one thing and then it turns out to be another.
Yeah.
But the reason that I think I let it go in Final Girl Support Group a little bit more is that when they reveal that it's this kid, for one thing, the actual reveal of how they do it is creepy as hell to me.
Yeah.
With his younger brother showing him showing Lynette these really disturbing drawings of just heinous shit going on. But the other thing is that when it does that, it starts to kind of have this dialogue about angry young men in cell culture.
Yeah.
And just this vitriol that they have towards women who are survivors of assault of some sort.
Yeah.
Whether it be murderous or sexual.
Yeah.
And he has a chip on his shoulder because his mother basically was not raising him because she got so invested in her work.
Mommy wasn't
there. But, I mean, that's on him still.
Right.
He's ultimately still responsible for that action.
Well, especially because you mentioned that it's her teenage son, but he's not. He's an adult.
He's
in his 20s, I'm pretty sure.
He's got some arrested development at some
Oh, level. Yeah, for sure.
But I think that, even though it's pretty predictable to figure out where that's going, I think the commentary there is really interesting.
Yeah.
But
I'll give you that.
In the Sager book, I don't feel that way. So they reveal that it is Coop, the cop
that's been protecting her all these years.
That was so fucking easy for me to figure out. But it's not even just that. Once the cards are all on the table, his personality is completely fucking different.
Yeah.
And he is just the Joker for the rest of the book.
Yeah.
There's no subtlety to him whatsoever. And when he does this whole monologue of I had to kill people because I had to keep things pure and my daddy didn't love me and
oh my God.
girl wouldn't go out with me and spilled my yogurt all over the ground and it pissed me off.
Oh my God, what the
That
heck?
doesn't actually happen, but I like to imagine that that's what his reasoning is because it just.
Oh no, the levels. I shouldn't have laughed like that.
It's fine. It just he just comes across as just such a simplistic psychopath.
Yeah.
After there was so much kind of interesting layers to his character beforehand, but the minute that he turns and he's like, "I'm in love with you," after that point, I'm like, "You're the fucking killer, dude."
Yeah.
And like when they reveal the flashbacks of how things actually happened, there was that part of me. I'm just like, this is a kind of a big stretch for me to buy into a lot of this.
See, I didn't feel like it was a big stretch, but again, that's like the genre that I read a lot is like that whole, I don't know, who done it type thing where there's like a million red herrings and then.
And I get that. I like that, that kind of Agatha Christie style, stuff too. I watch Benoit Blanc movies.
Right. But I will give you that his personality did change drastically, and while there is something to be said for like, masking who you truly are because you're trying to, have a specific persona, whatever, it does feel a little disingenuous for him to make such a shift.
Yeah. And the also the way that each of those characters gets taken out in the respective books and Final Girl Support Group, it's a collective effort that the group has to come together to stop this, basically young psychopath wielding assault rifles. But in Final Girls, he dies because he's fucking stupid. He lets his guard down.
Yeah. He's
an idiot.
You're yelling. I hope no one is watching this or listening to it with earbuds because your poor eardrums. I'm so sorry.
I'm sure they've listened to louder.
Oh my gosh.
But like they both kind of end in the same place, which is a final girl also in prison. Tina's in prison in Final Girls because I guess I don't really know. She lied about lied to police or something like that. I can't remember exactly why she.
Well, I think for one thing she took the fall for
killing
a Coop. Yeah.
Okay. But on then the flip side, the Stephanie Fugatti is in jail because she was complicit in basically attempted murder of all the other girls. And both of them are saying different things about Final Girl acceptance of the label. In Final Girl Support Group, it's kind of thrust upon her, because then they're just like, we're going to help you kind of work through whatever you're dealing with, even though we don't really regard you, even though you try to kill us.
Right.
Whereas, that's kind of interesting. Although I will say, I think I prefer it in the Sager version where it's like Quincy just finally accepts the label.
Yeah. She gets a little survivor tattoo.
Yeah.
And everything.
So, yeah, between the two, I really do lean towards the one that is more trusting of my prior knowledge of the genre itself. Also, Final Girl Support Group had more moments that actually kind of got me a little teary-eyed. Like, there's a whole sequence where Danny is stuck in jail because she's under protective custody. And the other, Lynette and some of the other girls with her decide that they're going to try to get her wife who has cancer out of the hospital to try to get them together. And they don't succeed at it.
No.
And so they let her sit and watch the sunrise and slowly die. I won't say I cried, but I definitely
I did.
I teared up at that moment.
I cried both times I read it.
Yeah. That book just has more moments that hit me emotionally.
Yeah, I would definitely say that one is the more like heartstrings kind of.
And I didn't get that with Sager.
No.
It's meant to be more pulpy.
Yes, definitely. I'll agree with that.
So, obviously we're on two different preferences here. I think we can both agree we like both the books.
Yeah, they were both really good. I've now read them both twice, and I would absolutely read them again.
Yeah, but for the reasons that I named, with Final Girl Support Group being more geared towards the sensibilities of somebody who is already familiar with the genre and trusts their knowledge of it, I will give that one 4 out of 5. Skulls.
Okay.
I would give it 5, but the predictability of the ending kind of dragged it down a little bit for me.
Yeah.
With Final Girls, I feel like it's a really interesting entryway into the genre for people who might not be familiar with it and are trying to dip their toes into it.
Yeah, definitely.
But for somebody like me, I think it simplifies it too much and also has the same predictability of the ending, but I just think is done in a much, frankly, dumber fashion.
I'll give you that. I mean, I'm not going to argue.
And so, in that regard, I give that one 3 out of 5 skulls.
Okay. All right. So I actually don't remember what I rated these on Goodreads, and I also don't know if it matters because I rated them both when I read them the first time. And for one thing, I have realized since then, thanks to you letting me know, I tend to rate things very, very easily. Like my default is almost just like a 5. I kind of like start at 5 and then I knock points off. I don't start in the middle.
It takes a lot to irritate you.
It does. Something. Like, literally, I have very few 3s and almost nothing below a 3. I have to actively dislike it to give it a 2. And it has to be absolute trash for me to give it a 1. I think one of the only books I've given a 1 is The Magicians by Lev Grossman. I hate that book so much. Anyway.
All the stuff that I've given ones is stuff before I even had Goodreads.
Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, I can't remember what rating I gave these, but based on my rereads, I'm going to say that I would honestly probably give them both 4 out of 5. I definitely prefer Final Girls just a little bit, but I don't think it's enough to make it a whole extra skull. And we haven't, are we doing half skulls, quarter skulls? Or are we just doing solid
I just kind of round up or down on
Let's do full numbers. All right. So, yeah, I'll give them both 4s.
Yeah. I don't like the idea of there being half a brain to something. But that's the Final Girl duology that we've set up here.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have something very special for Halloween coming up here. A very special episode.
Are we gonna give them a taste, or are we just gonna let them be surprised and come back?
Let's let them be surprised here.
All right. So join us on Halloween for a special bonus episode.
And then in November, we are going to finally talk about the author who we got to meet at the Carnegie Author Series here at our local library, Stephen Graham Jones.
Yes.
Who autographed all of our books except for the one we're actually going to talk about. However.
Yes.
But we're talking about The Only Good Indians.
All right.
And with that, you can find us on our socials. I am at Mr. Hyperaware on Facebook, Instagram, and mrhyperaware.wordpress.com. Also on Twitter, even though I don't use Twitter very much.
Yeah, please don't.
And you can also email us with your suggestions for anything that you want to cover at pagesfromthedarkside, all one word, at gmail.com.
Yep, and if you want to copy and paste it, it's down in the description box below. We also have our P.O. box down there if you want to send us a letter or a postcard or just, $100. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
Pay for a new house.
Oh my God. And then if you're interested in finding me, I am on YouTube. My Booktube channel is Earbud Bookworm, and that will be linked somewhere.
All right. And with that, we will see you on the next chapter of
Pages from the Dark Side. This has been a production of Pages from the Dark Side. Sound and video production by Alyssa and Dylan Ludwig. Music and artwork by Aaron Shively.